Welcome to the Rockish George podcast. I'm your host, George Dionne, and this is episode 75. Thank you for tuning into the podcast through our website, rockishgeorge.com, through our YouTube page, or on one of the many streaming podcasting platforms, or at the loudest.com on the planet, knac.com. My guest for this episode is Michael Ferentino. He is the frontman and founder for the band Love in Reverse. Love in Reverse got their start back in 1995, 1996, when they signed with John and Marcia Zazula, formerly of Megaforce Records. They had a 3-record deal with Reprise. From there, the principal parties involved in Love in Reverse have been a part of other projects and acts throughout the years, always returning to Love in Reverse. The act has a brand new album out now on Dada Drumming Records called Fake It. And here's Michael Ferentino of Love in Reverse to tell you all about it.
How you doing, George? Nice to meet you.
Good. Nice to meet you, Michael. How you been?
I'm doing really well, thank you. I listened to 2 of your shows last week. The Dale Bozzio one was the first one I listened to, and interestingly, I have a kind of weird connection with her from back in the 90s.
Well, I'd like to hear about that, actually, before we get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 1993, you know her guitar player, Warren Cucurula? His brother, Jerry Cucurula, is an excellent drummer. He was our drummer for a little while before we changed the name from Dog to Love in Reverse. I was living in New Jersey at the time. He introduced me to her through a phone call because, you know, they were friends for years, I guess. And then ultimately, he became the drummer for when she was doing this Missing Persons live thing for a little while. But he has a very quirky personality. I don't want to say anything negative about anybody, but we just couldn't work with him. And ultimately, they wanted Andres and me to be the bass player and guitar player for this new Missing Persons. We ended up opting for opening for them instead, which was really cool because I was like, there's no way I can work with him. So, you know, we graciously just said, we really appreciate the offer. And believe me, that was a really hard thing to turn down because I am a big, big fan of Frank Zappa and Missing Persons. So.
Well, with all respect, Dale appears to be a little flaky herself. It took a little bit to get that interview going. It took a couple of delays. It took a couple of, I'm not doing this anymore. It took we're going to do it again. And it was, yeah. I can see what you mean, kind of in that respect.
I can imagine.
But she's a sweetheart either way. So, I mean, it is what it is.
She really is. I also listened to your Vinny Appice interview. And again, a huge Black Sabbath and Dio fan. So that was cool.
Yeah, Vinny's a good guy. I've talked to him several times for different publications and stuff like that. I like talking to him. He's always got a good story.
Nice. Yeah. I just wanted to get a feel for the way you do your show. And I actually really enjoyed it, man. I'll be listening to more of it.
Awesome. I appreciate that. If I knew absolutely nothing about Love in Reverse, how would you describe the band's music to me?
I would say we're kind of an eclectic mix of reverence for the past, like bands like Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and, you know, like the early classic rock, with a look towards the future. So, you know, we're always trying to do new things using electronics and exploring all possibilities. We pretty much leave everything open to the table. So I think if you like songs with a lot of melody, but you also like a lot of surprises, that's what we're about.
I agree with that. And my own personal taste as far as kind of tying the sounds together, I hear a little bit of The Cure and I hear a little bit of Stone Sour.
Cool. I appreciate that. That's a nice comparison there.
You guys didn't originally start off as Love in Reverse. You started off as Dog. So how did you and Andres kind of get together and put this band together?
So Andres and I met each other when we were about 5 years old. We went to kindergarten together the first day of school. We actually have a picture of that somewhere. My mom has it. And we've been friends ever since. We both, you know, grew up with music because of our parents. By the time we were teenagers, I had moved away like about an hour and a half from where he lived, where we grew up together. And ultimately, we kind of reconnected once we both had cars and could drive. And we, you know, started playing each other demo tapes of things that we were working on and fell in love with each other's music that we were onto at that point and decided, let's start a project. And it was a studio project originally. And then we had a third friend, my friend Matt Schmidt. All three of us grew up on that same block since the early 70s. And we stayed friends. We're still best friends to this day. And Matt actually came on board to try to help us figure out how to do this thing live, since it was only 2 members. So we actually ultimately added a drum machine into the mix, and it was really just Andres and myself. So it was a drum machine with sequencers. And we're talking like between 1988, 1992. So it was like, you know, when it was all that stuff was still kind of difficult to try to work with because it was all kind of new to us, you know.
You started off as Dog and you changed the name to Love in Reverse, and you signed with the former owners of Megaforce Records. I believe they were your managers at the time. They got you your first major record deal on Reprise. You guys have been different bands over the years, but you've always come back to Love in Reverse. So kind of what brings about the change in you two, and then kind of what keeps bringing you back to Love in Reverse?
We wanted to have something that was central to the whole story, I guess. I mean, I would say Dog was probably the original thing, but once Dave came into the mix, we became a new band once it became a 3-piece. And we're like, the 3 of us are like brothers for life, you know? So we kind of decided that if we're going to do any project where it's the 3 of us, it will always be Love in Reverse. When it's just Andres and myself, we may use Amazing Me Project as our moniker now. And then I sometimes do stuff on my own, but a lot of my solo stuff that I do, and it's just acoustic based music, I still usually bring Andres in to either mix it or you know, add some instruments to it as well.
Excellent. And you guys released an album this year on August 19th. It's called Fake It through Dada Drumming Records. This was an album that was written during the lockdown period?
Yes, sir. There were a few tracks on the album that were actually pre-existing songs that I had demos of, and Andres and I both always wanted to get to them at some point. So I started that album actually because Andres is also a cinematographer, and he travels all over the world doing documentaries and whatnot. He was really unavailable until the pandemic kind of came. And then all of a sudden it was like, you know what, this solo album that I was going to be working on, he really loved the songs on it. And then I showed him some of the new stuff I was doing. And he's like, let me add some parts to your new solo album. And little by little, then Dave came into it and it became a Love in Reverse album.
And you guys were kind of working on this in secret. No one really knew that there'd be another album by Love in Reverse. Is that correct?
Sort of, yeah. But prior to that, we did one other one in 2020. It was released literally during the pandemic in October of 2020. And that one we had been working on since 2015, just little by little. We were just, you know, that was when we first decided to get back together. We live in different states. I live in Florida, Andres in New York, and Dave in New Jersey. We had to do everything, you know, in this modern era with sending each other files back and forth. So we had to get the groove of how to do that in the beginning, you know, where we weren't in the same room, because I had never worked that way with someone else before this. So it was really kind of interesting and a different take. And I love the process now. So we're really into we're going to just move forward and keep making music now.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about the singles that you've put out so far, if you don't mind talking about the lyrics. Some artists don't, some artists do. Let's talk a little bit about Manifesto.
All right, so Manifesto, that's it's a story of a breakup of some sort, right? Of whether it's a marriage, a partnership, a business partnership, or a country. So I want people to read different things into my music. So I kind of like to write things that are a little bit abstract lyrically, but there's always a number of ways to interpret it. But that's basically, it's about, you know, disenchanted by the other people getting involved in the situation, you know, lawyers and things of that sort.
Another song you have out, is certainly open to interpretation title-wise, is Assholes and Astronauts.
And you know what? That's one of those songs I'm going to leave that to the listener's interpretation. That's one of those songs I never want to explain. Let's put it that way.
Do you plan on more singles coming from this album?
There may be the song Fake It as a single. That's the title track of the record, of course. We're still kind of up in the air about whether we're going to do a third single or not. We'll just kind of see how things go with the rest of the record at this point.
Dada Drumming Records, is that your own label?
No, actually, it's a label of a friend of mine out of Texas. He's a guy I went to high school with, and he's been running that label for about 20 years. Mostly he started with like a lot of like heavy sludge bands and noise artists out of Japan, and some of the sludge bands I think are more American based bands. He wanted to branch out and start doing stuff that's a little more melodic and just kind of unpredictable stuff.
In a day and age where you can put your album together through computers, you still kind of need that label that bridges the gap in distribution, right?
Absolutely. So that's the cool thing, is that, you know, he has that with the Orchard, which is a great distribution company. Pretty much we can get our stuff out to all the streaming services, you know, video services as well, like Vivo and YouTube and all that, all in one shot when you put the album out. As far as the actual physical product, like the CD, he does that directly through his label.
You mentioned that everyone in Love and Reverse is in different states and it's tough to get together. So what does touring and playing live look like for this act?
We actually don't do it right now. So, and not only that, but I mean, like I said, Andres now is back into the cinematography thing. We all have different lives outside of making this music. So we're pretty much a studio band at this point.
Do you tour under your solo material?
I don't.
So you're pretty much just studio musician?
100% electro. Yeah, in the studio, 100%. But I have multiple projects. So there's an acoustic based one, but then there's an electronic based one called Bedtime for Robots, which is like taking, I'm going to say like early Pink Floyd type prog rock melded with that Tangerine Dream kind of, which you would call ambient, experimental electronic music, mostly like influenced by their 70s stuff. And then there's a whole nother level of it that's more like the kind of harsh electronic stuff going on these days. Maybe a little bit of like an instrumental Nine Inch Nails, Aphex Twin, Boards of Canada, or some influences.
So you got your hands in a lot of different fires as far as musically and just musical projects in and of itself. Do you work with other acts, or are you just strictly your projects?
Pretty much just our projects, yeah. I mean, once in a while I'll contribute to some of these compilation albums, you know, for charities and things like that. I've done a couple of these where you send your stems back and forth with each other just to experiment with things with some really interesting artists out of England and other parts of the UK as well.
So let's hit the time machine a little bit. I mentioned before you guys signed with the former owners of Megaforce Records. You had a album deal with Reprise Records. It's been 25 years since your first releases through Reprise. Probably doesn't feel like that, but let's talk a little bit about getting out your first EP, I Was Dog.
What happened was we signed with Johnny and Marcia. Their initial idea was, let's try to figure out some way to do this like in an indie way, like put this out, you know, on our own label, maybe start our own label, a different one other than Megaforce, something new, maybe do it through some other connection that they had. And then ultimately Howie Klein, who was the president of Reprise at that time, he was the vice president of Sire, and then he got hired on to Reprise, and he's an awesome guy. Johnny had him down to his house for like a barbecue one day. He calls me up and he's like, I got Howie Klein from Reprise, pretty much a captured audience right now. Can you get a show tonight? I'll bring him. I'll, you know, basically kind of drag him out, force him to watch this band. And it's funny because after talking to Howie later, he was like, oh my God, I knew Johnny was going to do this to me. He's like, I thought I was just going for a barbecue, and now he's making me watch a band on my night off. I want nothing to do with this. We actually got a show at this place called The Saint in Asbury Park, New Jersey. He came out. It was Andres, myself, and a drum machine still at that time. This is prior to Dave joining the band. He fell in love with it that night and came to me and he's like, I want to sign you. Let's talk about this week and figure out how we can, you know, make this happen. So little by little, the one thing that we all decided, because Andres and I did want to have a drummer in the band. It's just that at that point, we never found anyone that really gelled with us, but we saw this guy, Dave Halpern. He had played with a few bands that were pretty big in Jersey at the time. We just saw him play and was like, that's the guy. If we can have somebody like him, it would be amazing. So we were able to go to him at least with something to offer to him as well. We had a record deal on the table. We were, you know, managed by Johnny and Marcia Zazula. So he was pretty excited about it. And we met we totally hit it off. We, in every way, between, you know, the music, just we had a lot in common. That was that. So the next thing you know, we're in the studio working on I Was Dog with Russ Titleman, which was amazing because, I mean, this guy produced George Harrison, Ricky Lee Jones. He produced so many great records, man. And we were just blown away. You know, we were originally talking to Tony Visconti as a possibility that, you know, produced Bowie and T-Rex. And then, but ultimately we went with Russ. Next thing you know, we're in the middle of, it was the middle of the winter, right before Christmas of 1995. We recorded I Was Dog in the studio called Pie Studios up in Long Island. And we were like really isolated because it was, you know, it's a summer town and it was in the middle of the winter. So we were just in the studio almost 24/7. And then they brought this other guy in to help us with some of the drum programming that we were doing. This guy named Jimmy Braylauer, who had worked with Madonna on Like a Virgin, all the Duran Duran albums. And we fell in love with him too. So we brought him in and actually made him co-producer or executive producer because he put so much time into the record with us. And we did that EP. We took a Christmas break and we came back and recorded I Was Here, the full length album. Literally, it was like back to back. Both albums were done before the first one was released. And then they released I Was Here while we were, I mean, I Was Dog, the EP, while we were getting ready to tour. While we were in the middle of the first tour, the album came out.
You toured with some pretty prominent bands of that time, I believe.
Yes, sir.
What was kind of an experience opening for it? I'm sure you fanboyed out a little bit with some of them, but what's the memory that stands out touring with at that time?
It was brilliant just touring with bands like Gravity Kills and Republica because we all became like really close friends during that tour. We fell in love with each other. It was, the first tour was Gravity Kills, then Republic opened for them and us opening the whole show. It was like a 3-band tour, and it was amazing. Like every night was just an adventure with these guys. It was so much fun. And then ultimately Republica became so big because of their single Ready to Go that they went off on their own and the tour was ending. So they asked us to open for them. So we went on tour at Republica. So this all North America. We never actually got to the UK with either one of those bands, but or out to Europe at all. But we did all of North America with both of them. First the 3-part tour, then the 2 of them. And then Ian Astbury from the Cult. That was really interesting because, you know, I was a huge fan of his work. The first night I walked in, because I hadn't seen anything from him in a long time because he had split up with the Cult for a while. He was in a band now at that point called the Holy Barbarians. And that's who we were opening for. We were both Reprise mates. So apparently he had heard the record from Howie Klein and was like, I want these guys opening for us. I remember the first night we're in San Antonio, Texas, and he was doing his sound check and I walked into the room and I didn't recognize him because he had cut all his hair off and he was wearing a basketball jersey and he just looked like some regular guy, you know, I was like, oh, I guess they're having their sound guy do their sound check. I'm like, but he sounds so much like Ian. It's weird. And then I walk up to him and I'm like, holy shit, that is him. I looked in his face. I'm like, that's Ian Astbury for sure. And I was like, hey, thanks for bringing us on the tour. Did you hear our album at all? He goes, why do you think you're here, man? So we totally hit it off with him. And there was one surreal moment. Andres and I were at a Waffle House while we were on that tour. We're sitting there having breakfast and Ian walks up to the window, knocks on the window, looks at us, and he's like, waves, and then comes in. And I'm looking at him like, this is really surreal, man. Ian Astbury's coming to sit with us and have breakfast at a Waffle House in the middle of the United States here in the middle of nowhere. This is just, you know, an incredible, surreal moment for us as new artists at that time.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you miss playing out live or do you like the studio more?
To be honest with you, I love both. Yeah, there are elements of playing out live I do miss for sure, but we've always been more about the studio recording. We're obsessed with it, man. I bought my first 4-track recorder in 1987. I got like this little MT2X cassette based one. That one was a Tascam one. No, I forget which brand that one was. Anyway, but it might have been a Tascam. But we started with that. once I got into, and actually even before that, my dad and I were in a band together, and my dad was the singer, I was the guitarist when I was 10 years old. It was 1978. That was the first time I ever went into a recording studio, and I always wanted to have my own studio from that time on. So when those things first became available, I saved up all my work money and allowance money and started buying all this stuff up.
I know we're talking about the current release of Fake It, but you had a long period there in the lockdowns, and you had some time between 2015 and the 2020 release. You must have some music you're still working on for the next album by Love in Reverse.
We have about 20 some odd tracks already recorded for the next one. So that's what I spent yesterday doing vocal tracks up in my office yesterday. We have a ton of stuff. I mean, and plus my Bedtime for Robots stuff I'm consistently working on. I was just talking to Andres this weekend, and after going through all of the stuff that, we would actually eventually put out, we probably have about 80 hours worth of music altogether that is actually what I would consider listenable stuff. Like there's stuff that I would never want anybody to hear because it was just working things out. And none of these are live recordings. These are all studio recordings.
You say the other band that you're working with is called Bedtime for Robots. Do you have a current release with that?
Yeah, actually, Terror Firmament is the most recent one. And again, Dada Drumming put that one out as well. But we didn't do any physical products on this stuff. We're just doing streaming alone.
And obviously, Fake It is available in physical product, CD, and yes, digital streaming. Had you considered vinyl for something like that, or was it just?
I would love to do it, and we've talked about it, but we're just gonna wait to see how things go as far as making enough money back on the CD, because they're really expensive to do right now. And his labels, it's an incredible little label, but obviously it's run by one man, so money is always an object when you're dealing with that.
That's all I got for you today, Michael. I want to thank you for coming on the Rockish George podcast. The new album is Fake It. It's out now on Dada Drumming Records. Sounds great. I loved it. It's not normally the style of music I'm into, but something about it called to me.
I appreciate you so much, George. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for having me on your show.
Once again, I want to thank Michael Ferentino for coming on the Rockish George podcast. Be sure to check out the latest album by Love in Reverse called Fake It, out now on Dada Drumming Records. Head over to your favorite streaming app, take a listen to the album. If you like what you hear, make sure you buy a physical copy. Support the artist. For all things Love in Reverse, head over to facebook.com/loveinreverseband. If you want to check out all the other projects that Michael Ferentino has been a part of, head over to Bandcamp and search for Michael Ferentino. I also want to thank Adrenaline PR for making this interview possible. You've been great. I've been George Dionne. I'll see you again soon.